Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
Hey, Parm. So you and I have spoken on how you like to use data to drive the development of your sales reps. Can you share with the audience a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah. So if you're really maniacally focused on developing the people in your team, you can't just walk into that conversation with an opinion, because everybody's got an opinion. Somebody could, if I went to a rep and actually said to them, hey, I think you need help on PG, that's an opinion. But if I went in with a fact and actually explained this is the rationale why. Now, here's where a lot of it starts to fall down, is we have so much more data nowadays that in our go-to-market organizations. And if you don't simplify it and you don't take a step back, because I've been lucky to work with really great RevOps leaders like Avtar Verma, who's here, Tom Levy and Danielle Kavanagh, when we were together at AppDynamics, I'd always go into the hypothesis. I'd always say, this is what I need to kind of look at because something's telling me something's off. And then when you really simplify it, when a sales rep wakes up in the morning, there's three things that really go through their head. Have I got enough pipeline? Am I busy enough in the deals that I'm running? And what am I closing? So if you take the step right back, it's like, well, you need to have a simplistic way to look at that data that anchors on those three things. And like Cap and John, in our language, we talk about, because we've all come from like the kind of same ecosystem, it's like, what's happening in PG? What's happening as they progress their deals through the sales process, VO, and what are they closing? So in simplistic ways, you need to start with that. Now, what often happens is if a leader can get that level of information in a simplistic manner to coach their reps on a Monday one-on-one, what happens is they overwhelm them. And I try and always coach them and keep it really simple. And I try and think of it like 2-week sprints. Like if you celebrate the small wins in these 2-week sprints, the lagging indicator of the deal closing, that happens by itself. But even when you take that data and then you start to build a skill, will 90-day plan for them. And I always ask the question to my leaders, what are 3 tectonic things that if we focused on, anchored in data, that would change this rep's destiny in the next 90 days where they are on their journey? It's not like a seasoned rep, like a Ted Mahara from BMC or AppDynamics. You'd coach that person differently to somebody just promoted out of the BDR org. Does that kind of resonate?
Yeah, a couple things in there, Parm. So one is, that, like you said, today we get too much data and you have to simplify that data.
Yeah.
But doesn't it also take an experienced sales leader to know either how to simplify the data or what data is more relevant to the rep to coach them?
It does. But I kind of use this analogy that the moment you step up into first line leadership and you go all the way up to the CRO, forget the title. You're actually the regional director of problems, or you're the chief problem officer. So at that point, you're really looking at what is the problem. And a lot of leaders, you're right, they think about it that it's we've got a revenue problem. But at that point, when you look at it, but we've got a revenue problem, it's too late. So it's trying to look at it much, much earlier and trying to understand that. And that's where we have this concept of leading indicators. And it kind of surprises me because if you think about it, you can be an accountant, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be a sporting professional, you can be in motorsport. There is telemetry everywhere. And I use this example quite a lot. If you ever drive a high performance car like a McLaren or a Ferrari or a Porsche, the dashboard is so simplistic compared to you driving a minivan or something like that, where it's got everything. It'll tell you like there's so much stuff.
Right.
And the point you're trying to make at is when you look at it, it gives you the information you need at that point in time. And I think what's happening is that because RevOps has so much data, it kind of bubbles a lot of stuff up. And then behind RevOps, you got the next problem, enablement. Because RevOps gets this data, enablement thinks, oh, more is better. So then you've got this two kind of gulfs coming at the rep, and they just get overwhelmed. But you're right, it does take a seasoned leader to look at that. But it also, I don't think it should just be the sales leader. It should be in partnership with their enablement partner. It should be in partnership with their RevOps. And the three of them should really have a mantra of, how do we simplify this? Easier said than done, though.
Yeah. So I agree with the fact that, it should be in partnership with other leaders like your sales ops person or rev ops person, but how closely should you look at the data based upon the opinion that you have that the sales rep is not doing something right?
So I have this kind of
certain data to back the opinion, or are you looking for certain data and then your opinion comes out of it?
So I have a methodology where I go facts, deeper facts, and conclusions. So when you look at it, the first thing is it's unequivocal that when we're going to go and look at PG, how many MBMs have been booked and done, you look at the activity and the visible opportunity that they're running, which is the meetings weekly, how many proof of values that they're setting up or business value assessments, and how many deals over a certain clip have they got in forecast and upside. Once you've got the table stakes, the facts, that's the facts. That's the equivalent of when we stand on the bathroom scales and we get a fact. We might not like it, but it's a fact. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing you look at is you look at the deeper facts. You're like saying, okay, now that I've got those facts, let's look at the lag time between the booked and the done. New business meeting, like with it been booked, would it been done? How did that correlate to conversion ratio? Did we book and do the MBMs at the right level? Did we have a value pyramid? Did we use the first meeting deck or our corporate narrative deck? Then we're looking at the breadth and the spread of our meetings. Are they going in every week and they're really busy in that opportunity that we know that's been a zombie, that's been around for a while and has been meeting the janitor every single time it's not actually moving? So you're starting to look at that before you draw conclusions, because here's what will happen. You'll end up in a situation, if you don't go facts, deeper facts, conclusion, you're going to go with the facts at surface level and you're going to spend a lot of time debating. Like John was on holiday, Michael was away, they're in an RFP process, we can't get it done. So there's a methodology I was trying to follow. It's like facts, deeper facts, conclusions, and that's the core operating rhythm of the first line leader weekly.
Okay, so then you try to tie this back to coaching the rep, right? So then from there, you have to decide, typically, is this a skill issue or is it a knowledge issue?
Yeah.
And how do you, from data, how do you then decide if it's a skill issue or a knowledge issue or both?
So I think part of that makes sure it kind of goes back to hiring when you look at kind of skill will. Because one of my mentors once said to me, I can't put in you what the good Lord's already taken out. So that kind of helps you understand. But I think the first thing in terms of like, is it a knowledge issue or is it a skill issue? It's being curious and actually understanding like where they are. Because if a rep is a ramped rep versus a ramping rep, they're going to have a different problem. So for example, let's take PG, like pipeline generation. On a ramping rep, you'll always have a quality and a quantity issue because they've just not had enough at bats. But with a ramped rep who might have over-rotated to doing a lot of deals and has taken their eye off pipeline generation, it could well just be that it's a quantity issue. So it's been able to understand where they are and then actually being able to triangulate that back.
I like that, but and I also like, I don't mind data, but for me, I've always liked observation, like going on sales calls with people to really see what they're good, especially if you think this rep has a problem in this specific part of the sales process, trying to go on sales calls where they're doing that to try to coach and develop them.
So that comes on to my second point, John. We make sure that
we're not done with the first one yet, but go to the second one because we'll come back.
Yeah, we make sure that the first line also has a set of leading indicators that I call it the RD code of conduct of how much time they're spending in the field. now, so that they're spending more time in the field. And it's got to be these impact meetings. Like when we go and close a deal, we can sit back when the win notes come in on email or Slack, and you look back and it might have been 50, 60 meetings. You can probably count on two hands where you're like, they were impact meetings that fundamentally moved the needle. And often those impact meetings are new business meetings, setting the decision criteria with the champion, meeting the champion, like getting to know the champion, meeting the economic buyer, asking the three questions, being at the echo back, the negotiation. Now, if we know they're the toughest meetings, we have a duty as leaders to be training them in the toughest meetings.
Right.
So it's one thing looking at the stats. I totally agree with you. The second is calling the play. And that was part of the reason last week I did, with some of our reps, we did Marseille, Zurich, London, and New York, because it's end of quarter. And they're tough meetings, and we're trying to help them get them across the line.
So I still want to stay on this. So then,
Yeah.
And I know you're not doing this because you talked about a number of accomplishments, EB meetings, setting the decision criteria, those types of things. But what I get worried about with people that don't have as much experience as you and maybe listening to this conversation, which sounds on some levels pretty theoretical.
Yeah.
Right. Is that they force these reps into doing activities and not accomplishments. And then what happens is, as an example, it's a number of meetings you get. And the rep gets a whole bunch of meetings, but they're stuck down low in the organization and they have a really hard time. They get trapped and then they can't get a champion. Versus measuring reps on how many AEB meetings did you get?
Yeah.
That could be the first thing, because if you can look back saying, okay, if they got this accomplishment, it meant that they did these other things prior to that. They had to have done that.
Yeah.
Right? If you got an EB meeting, chances are you already got a champion. To get a champion, you probably did proper discovery, right? And you can work backwards. So sometimes, at least at your level, I've always liked those accomplishments. Like as an example, our average deal size at one company was $250,000, and the rep's quota was $500,000 a quarter. So I would just basically tell them, I don't care what else happened. You had to give me 2 POVs a quarter.
Yeah.
And if I got the 2 POVs a quarter, but I trained them really well on setting up a POV, making sure you had the right economic buyer meeting, all the things that led up to that, then it's almost like I can just count how many POVs are going to happen this quarter times 250, and I kind of know what my number is. Now, going down levels, you have to get a lot more granular, but that's in some ways why I like accomplishments a lot better than activities. Now, that said, you're probably going to respond to say, well, to get those accomplishments, you need certain activities, right? So talk about that.
No, I think you're right on the accomplishment. I don't think there's any dispute in that. It goes back to the organization's maturity of what is the problem that you're solving.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to say to somebody, well, let's get to an economic buyer, and they're doing a whole bunch of meetings with a bunch of coaches, we know that's never going to happen. If they're going in and they're having conversations of our product as a feature, like not a feature function, but they're talking very, very technical, they might get a shot at the economic buyer once, but they're going to get relegated to who they sound the most like. That goes back to the first point I was saying is, you're the chief problem officer or you're the RD of problems. You're like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? As an organization matures, I totally agree that that's where we should be and that's where we're going to get to. But even in some of the observations I've had at Benchling, one of the big things we've seen is that we were really good at talking to scientists for our product. They loved our product, and a lot of customers would come on board. Scientists had a lot of money, but the funding environment and just the way the technology environment has been over the last couple of years, when funding moved up from scientists to a chief scientific officer or an SVP of R&D, and funding moved left towards the CIO, the conversations didn't resonate because we weren't ready and we weren't audible ready. So a lot of the time I've spent was focusing on the value framework to kind of help them, that when that conversation happens, that you are in the office of the chief scientific officer, because sure, productivity is important to them, but what's really important to them is how do they ship a new drug out to the market, which has got massive shareholder value. So I totally get what you're saying. I think the key thing what I'm just trying to share with your listeners is it's got to be appropriate to the maturity of your business based on the problem that you're trying to solve. So it's a kind of crawl, walk, run.
Yeah. So I want to stay on this just a little bit to make sure that we really clarify this for the audience and even for myself. So
Yeah.
I've always thought that when I kind of picture the alarm goes off, my rep wakes up, they throw their legs over the side of the bed, they stand on the ground. I want them to, at that moment, to know exactly what I expect from them. So I only need 3 to 4 things max, something that they never have to write down. It's in their head. So with all this data, what I get worried about is, do your reps know specifically those 3 to 4 things that you want from them on a daily basis in order to make their number? Because, and I'm sure that you do it because you're a mature, seasoned CRO, but I get worried that some other people, they give them too much data. The reps hop out of bed and to have no real idea of where to start because there's too many things that the manager or leader wants from them. Can you talk a little bit through that?
Yeah, I keep it simple from the point of view where we turn around and we say, look, if you focus on pipeline generation and you focus on progressing your deals through the sales opportunity, the rest of the stuff will take care of itself because the rest are what I call hygiene factors. So when we go and say 2 meetings per week, which is what one of the leading indicators is for us, I try and simplify it even further and just say, look, meeting number 1, what's the biggest red flag in medic that you want to wake up today and go and solve? Meeting number 2, who are we going to take the 3 whys to that's someone influential in your account? So we try and distill it down that it's like, it might seem 2 meetings per week in an active opportunity, but then I've heard this a lot. Parm, what do I do in those 2 meetings? I was like, what's the biggest red flag in medic? They might say decision criteria, pull up the org chart, who can we go and talk to that can help ask these questions? And then it's like around the 3 whys, who do we go and take this to that's influential in your campaign? And actually, when you have that coaching conversation, they're coming up with ideas that they're like, actually, I've got 5, 6 meetings I can do this week. Like, great, let's just go and do that over the next week or 2 weeks, and we'll reconvene. I don't want to boil the ocean. I just want to keep it really simple sprints that they can do in a weekly, bi-weekly way, and then you celebrate the small wins from that.
So if you're talking to a first or second or third line leader right now in the audience that doesn't have as much experience as you, what would you tell them is some of the key data that they need to pay attention to?
So first thing I'd always look at is obviously the top of funnel. So looking at what's the new business meetings that they're booking, that they're doing, and that they're doing.
And you have to, just to clarify, you have to have the definition of all these things. So what is the definition of a new business meeting, right? So anything that Parm is going to talk about here, you have to define it to make sure everyone in your organization knows what you mean by, let's say, a business meeting.
So in our definition of a new business meeting is we always say pain and champion and a potential new route to money. So that's the first thing we look at very crystal clear. And it's how many have they booked? How many have they done? So obviously that's got a conversion rate of booked to done and then done to a visible opportunity. The second thing you look at is their activity. How much time are they spending in? And it's the right activity, back to your point, John, around activity. I always use the phrase activity with accomplishment, which is activity without purpose. So it's actually, what are they actually achieving? And that then comes down to the 1 meeting minimum to de-risk the biggest red flag in medic, and the other one around the 3 whys. And then looking at, obviously, like, where are we spending time around proof of value and BVA? So how many of them are we doing? And that's where you're driving the ASP up, and that's where you're looking at the future quarters, because every time we do a business value assessment, the ASP goes up 3.5x. So that's how you're going to raise that. And then the last 2 where we talk about what's in forecast or upside, that's just kind of, you're managing that as part. A lot of leaders do that bucket at the end because they have to, because their CEO's calling them or their CRO's calling them. But if they focus on that first at a high level, what's the new business meetings that I'm booking and doing? What's my activity that I'm spending in the active opportunities? How many proof of values have I got? How many BVAs I've got? Now, you can get a lot more curious on this stuff. We were doing a pipeline review this morning for one of our products, and my RevOps leader had this dashboard up, and it was because we've had a bit of a reorg and we were going through all the lines. And while they were talking to the 2 leaders, like who run that product line, and they were trying to answer them. I was just going straight in and just asking questions. How long's it been open? How long's it been open? What stage is it in? How many days has it been in the stage? And it was being able to just say it's dead. It's been open too long. It's been in this stage. It's dead. Go next move, right? And there was like about 40 opportunities, and I'm whistling right through. And am I maybe right? I'm sorry, am I maybe wrong on one or two? Sure. But when you're trying to, I use this phrase, I'm not a pilot, but it's a good friend of mine, Jake Yount from Abnormal Security, the antivirus guys that used to work for me at AppDynamics. And he's a pilot. And he always told me this analogy. He goes, Parm, the first line leader is VRF, and the second line leader above is kind of IRF. And I can't remember the acronyms. I think it's visual recognition, the other one's instrumentation. Right. And he said, the first line leader, he said, their biggest strength is that they can be omnipresent and they can drop into deals and just help out and get stuff done. But the moment that first line leader steps up into second, third, or fourth, which is what you're saying, John, that biggest power becomes their biggest weakness because they can't rely on that because it's so far away. So they need to be able to look at the data and then say at which point. And the analogy he used with me was goes, it's equivalent to somebody flying a Piper jet, and it can fly a certain distance, and it can see the sea, it can see the freeways, it can see everything around. And then when someone's in a Learjet, they're flying, 25,000 foot at a certain speed. They can't see the ground. Everything's off instrumentation. But when they're having to come down and land, they're also having to check like what's happening in and around the surroundings. So I think that ability, is one of the things that a lot of leaders should kind of think about. Am I leading? And I use the phrase leading. Am I leading through like the VRF kind of methodology, or like IRF as if I'm like a pilot? I might have made that totally wrong, by the way.
So. Oh, that's a good one. And you have to do, and I think your point is you have somewhere in your organization, you have to be able to capture both those views.
Yeah.
Let me throw a wrench in something here because not a wrench, but just a twist. I think some companies that are creating dashboards and getting data on what we're doing inside of our organization are sometimes and more often missing the boat because something has changed. And when you dig into it farther, you find that how the customer is acquiring or how the buyer is buying is changing. You alluded to it a little bit, Parm, when you said we found that the budget was moving from this person to that person. It was going from this organization to another organization. I find that companies, they find that out too late. And they're like, well, our metrics aren't working. Well, that's because your buyer moved somehow. How do you deal with that?
So I think a lot of it comes down really early on, figuring out is the money coming from a run the business initiative or a change the business initiative. And run the business is like typical CIO sits with the CFO. CFO goes, you got a $2.5 billion budget. Last year it was 2.8. You got to go and take 300 million out of your budget. And then they're like, okay, and that kind of peters down into the number of tools that they got. That peters down into, hey, we got to go and do more with the hyperscalers. Conversely, there's always changed the business money flying around, which is like, hey, take a new product to market, keep so-and-so out of jail, drive more shareholder value. I know for a fact that a lot of companies, I think we did a good job of it at AppDynamics, candidly, and I think we've been trying to do a better job, every company I've been at, Data Robot, Luminary, even here at Benchling, is trying to figure that out really early on of run the business versus change the business. And then it's always, we've been selling a lot to scientists, but we've kind of created this kind of value framework around, we call it the 3 legs of the stool. So what does IT need to know and be part of? What does the R&D and the scientists need to know and be part of? And what does data science do? Because if you're spreading yourself like that, you've got a value offering to each one, you can go higher, and then you can start to get access to 2 kind of buying centers. A lot of the times we struggle because we don't know the buying center and we don't know where we are in the priority. I don't think we ask collectively enough that, like, if we're like, I've asked a lot of times with my reps and my leaders, hey, is this the more like, where does this stack rank on the initiative? And it's like, it's number 4. And I was asked, well, what's number 1, 2, and 3? And I said, is there anything we can attach ourselves to 1 or 2 just so we can get further up there?
That's good.
Very good.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else that tells you, and by the way, how do you capture that to get data around it? So the buyer is maybe changing, maybe shifting, maybe doing things differently. How do you know? When do you get alerted? How do you turn that into data that you can do something with? And how do you know you need to change some of your measurements? Or do you guys have any examples of when that's happened? Something changed at the buyer level, not at our level,
Yeah.
at the buyer level.
Yeah, it's you got to start. I think it goes back to your account hypothesis and the research that you do in the account, which way I'm going to go and engage. So in our industry, we've got like the big global biopharma where they've got like, the big GLP-1 drugs and, share prices going well, it's moving to the right. Their mindset is, how do I invest to keep growing and to keep that lead ahead? Then there's others in the industry where the share price is taking a bit of a hit because the pipeline's not there or a patent cliff's coming. And for those, they're looking at a cost out. They're looking at, how do I consolidate? How can I rationalize? So part of this is actually earlier in the campaign saying, well, what's my point of view? What's my value pyramid? What is the first iteration of how I'm going to set my stall out? And I think if you don't prep like that, you find out really later on that you didn't know which way the wind was blowing in the account. We might have been selling a consolidation play, and they're like, we don't give 2 hoots about consolidation. We've acquired 5 companies. We're going to let them be like they are. We're after land grab.
Yeah. I think that's really, really good. It's the intersection of an outside in mentality. Where's the buyer? What do they care about? Where are they going? What are they trying to accomplish? And the inside out mentality is knowing everything that we know about how we're set up, how we go to market, how we message, how we qualify against that. So there's an inside view and there's an outside view. I think many companies, they rely too heavily on what they do internally, and they miss an area of opportunity to understand what's changing, what's changing in the wind. So
Do you
I
think that's
like the way you
unique?
said it.
Cap, do you think that's unique though? Because the only reason I'm asking that is I operate in a vertical SaaS market.
Yeah.
So we're not horizontal SaaS, we're vertical SaaS. I have
Yeah.
5,000 customers, like potentially I have an addressable market of 5,000 customers worldwide.
Yeah.
So for me to know from John and Sally starting a biotech to try to cure some disease, starting at that gets acquired to all the way to a Pfizer or a J&J or an Eli
Yeah.
Lilly. Like, we know because either these guys know that they're going to get acquired at some point and they're trying to get to a point where they've got a viable option. We know these guys are basically trying to say, like, which are the novel diseases that we want to go after and want to have. I personally think it's been easier for me personally in a vertical SaaS market to understand that. I don't know what your opinion is on horizontal
Well,
SaaS
no,
stuff.
the more you can verticalize, the more you can adjust your value proposition to really pinpoint the problems you're trying to solve and how you solve those. And those customers solve those problems, might solve those problems differently. And I think the point that I would like to, highlight here is you have to have your eye on both, because people
Yeah,
will come into that market and say, okay, here's how I run my playbook. It's these
yeah,
number of calls a week. It's these number of POVs. And you could come in with a playbook that's worked fantastically somewhere else where you've been and completely miss the mark. I see that a lot, by the way.
Well, that
yeah,
happens a lot. Yeah, where a new CRO comes in from another company, is going to cookie cutter his own methodologies and everything straight back into into the new company. It's a different buyer, different ASP, different industry, different use case, different persona, different everything, and they think they're going to cookie cutter it. Just never
Yeah.
works. It's never that
Yeah.
simple.
It isn't that simple. And the funny thing is, when I joined here at Benchling, I asked Saji, so the two co-founders, they're in their early 30s. They've been at it for 12 years. Great guys, Saji and Ashu. I asked them, I said, hey, what do you think I should do? And they just said, go on a 90-day listening tour and get in front of customers and just give us what you think. And I said, no problem. Second week on the job, he goes, hey, we've got a deal running at J&J. Go out of Philadelphia, get in there. And I'm sitting in this room, and there's probably about 7 or 8 people that are from Benchling, and it's got like, you got the product guys, you got the strategy guys, you got the PhD scientists, and you've got about 10 people from the other room. And I'm sitting there and they're talking acronyms, and I've not got a clue. I'm literally watching ping pong going back and forth, back and forth. But then a moment came up, and I just started asking just questions that I knew that I'd be able to handle, which was around, hey, like, obviously you've been at this evaluation for quite a while, like, what's been driving it? Like, what is it you're looking to get out of? Well, what happens at that point if it doesn't? Now, given that there's so many teams involved, how do you go and make decisions? And in my head, I'm trying to figure out, well, what can I rely on? I can go back to my next level. Who would have to be involved in this decision process? And then I might have only spoken about 10, 15 minutes, but at the end, I remember saying to the rep, he's actually a leader now here. We promoted him, I think it was about back in November, a guy called Trove. And I said to him, hey, mate, this deal's closable at the end of the quarter. And he goes to me, he goes, no, it's not. He goes, it takes 6 months for an MSA to be done at like J&J. Say, I hear it all. It's like, mate, it's closable. It's just because you ain't got a plan. So he goes and builds in. So I kind of coach him, like, it's like, hey, we're going to use this thing called an interest tracker. And so we're going to track that. We're going to find out who it is. We're going to spend time with them. I got involved. Our CTO got involved. Lo and behold, he goes and closes it 1 week before the end of the quarter.
Wow.
New logo. We hadn't broken into that for several years. And like, we're talking like new logo, 6 years. Like, we've been trying to get into this account, and this guy breaks it in. And it's just like, it's amazing when you see those kind of like, people just kind of get it.
Well, also,
Hey,
the guy's coachable. You got to give him credit, right? He listened to you and he did what you wanted him to do, and it worked.
But not only is he coachable, and going back to Cap's point about having that opinion going in, he's been one of the guys that has always gone in with an opinion to talk at a higher level. There's been a DNA, like, he's done it multiple times in other accounts I've seen. Even when we're prepping, he's like, we're doing the value pyramid training. Everything's been that. He made this comment. He goes, I know we're going to win that conversation with the scientists because we've got great solution consultants or PhDs. I don't need to win that fight. I need to win the fight up there. And it's just been amazing, like, seeing him.
So let me ask you a question. What you said really triggered a question for me. When new CROs, and I don't care if
Yeah.
you're a new CRO or new CROs or a CRO in a new environment,
Yeah.
I get a lot of phone calls from people and they'll ask me, hey, what's the first thing that I should do? I'm a new CRO, and you said your leadership team told you to go out on a listening tour. So that was their feedback to you. You've seen other feedback. I'd like to get a quick dialogue here.
Yeah.
What advice would you give CROs that are taking over or, either taking over or coming into a new situation? What do they do first?
So I'll kind of share what I did, which kind of helped me. So the first thing I did, just while I was talking to the founders and the board, I built this thing called a CRO Scorecard, which would allow me to go and get a whole bunch of data from their CFO that would allow me to actually have a really good hypothesis. But, we always talk about winning hearts and minds. I might have won your mind with that. I'm not winning your heart with that. So I'd have that CRO scorecard in my pocket, and I would only just sit with the CEO and just kind of walk him through. I said, this is what I'm seeing, but I said, let's jointly trust and validate. Do you agree? And they go, yeah, we do. End up joining. So my first week, I was out on the road. The one thing I did do while I was here was I joined at an opportunistic time, just about at the end of a quarter going, and then a new quarter was starting. So it allowed me to actually
Yeah.
build the QBR decks with my RevOps team and what I needed to see. And then it also allowed me then to go and do a leadership QBR. And then in that same amount of time, it allowed me to get round a lot of the deals. But the key thing was everything I'm just talking to yourselves and to the listeners is everything around the revenue org. The other vital thing that I had to go and do was go and build a relationship with product, go and build a relationship with engineering, go and get to know my HR people counterparts, because it's at the tip of the iceberg. It's like, that's great, and you're going to move that way, and that might fix a quarter or two, but it's everything else around it. So I think what Saji gave me the feedback was, he goes, yeah, go on a 90-day listening tour. And he goes, then come back. And then what was the good thing was when I came back, there was I had the original data before I walked in. I had more relevant data. And actually there was examples where both of our opinions based on the data was wrong. So which allowed us then to jointly sit down and say, like, here's what I propose that we need to do, and this is the why behind it. But it also helped bring the leaders and the reps and the organization along, because you need to articulate the why. You can't cookie cutter it. And I made a mistake on that. Like at Data Robot, like I did go in pretty early on, like kind of saying, this is it, how we do it, cookie cutter it. And it was tough because with COVID, you couldn't travel, you couldn't build that personal connection. Everything was over Zoom. But if there's one thing I'd do back, like I'd definitely slow it down and actually spend more time getting to know the people, but also doing that listening to them.
I like
Johnny, how
that the
about you?
CEO
I like that.
told you to go on a 90-day listening tour. That's where you
Sorry.
can learn so much instead of telling you like you got to perform and make the number in the next 90 days, which is puts too much pressure on you to just do something short term, but it's not long lasting. I like that.
Yeah, you've got no foundation for success, because all
Yeah.
you're going to do is you're going to do something unnatural. And then what's going to happen is you pull it out one quarter and you still got the same unnatural thing. You have to go and find second quarter. At some point, the luck runs out.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. Early on, when contemplating this, I came up with this thought process that said it's a combination. I'm talking about new CROs or new CROs that go into an environment. They don't have to be a new CRO, but they could just be new for that company.
Yeah.
It's a combination for me of having a command, and we obviously I don't want to people that know me and know force management. I don't want to
Yeah.
uh, uh, get confused with like we have offerings that say this, but that's not what I'm talking about. You always had to have command of the plan, and
Yeah.
you have to have command of the talent. And and that's what you have to do in the first 90 days. You have to figure out what the plan is, because a lot of times budgets are put together. You're not always coming in a great environment as you come in, the budget's being done, you're part of the budget, you're explaining
Yeah.
that's pretty rare when that happens.
Yeah.
So
No
so
doubt.
there's a budget. How is that budget put together? How is that number made? How, what's the makeup of that? And you got to be a data person there. So you got to own that number. And I don't think it looks like a lot to me lately when I've been having these conversations. People are like, well, let me dig into process. Let me dig into the people part. People part is huge. It's not an either or. You got to do both, but they rely on getting out there, knowing the people, understand the process. And then, okay, so let's say they missed the quarter. Well, I'm not really responsible for it because I wasn't, I came in, blah, blah, blah. I always get a little bit of a stomach ache because I'm like, the minute you take that CRO role, no matter what anybody says,
You own it.
you own the
You own
number.
it. Yeah.
You own the
Yeah.
number. So the first thing I always tell people is own the number. And they're like, well, how am I going to own the number? I just got here. You gotta understand how it works, how it comes in, how it goes out, and you gotta put yourself in a position to have command of that, and then also dig in on the people. You can't go wrong, I don't think, when you look at I gotta have command of the plan and commanded the talent? The first 90 days, that's what I'm trying to understand.
What came out at the end of the 90 days was a unified 5 things that me and the CEO would look at when we made any go-to-market decision. And it was funny because I kind of trained the leaders on it at the leadership QBR. They presented their businesses. Then I kind of told them, I said, right, this is how we're going to look at our business and this is kind of thing. And there's 5 things I kind of said. So number one, time to ramp. And the measurement of ramp was time to do 2 transactions of a certain size based on your business cohort. Different for inside, different for the mid-market, different for the enterprise. So time to do 2 deals. That was the first one. Second one, like productivity per rep, which is the 4 trailing quarters. But then again, the paranoia sets in. I say, hey, and if you want to get extra, like you want to get a gold star by your name, always look at productivity, taking out the top deal and taking out the top 3. Figuring out is the brittleness in your business. And then the third one was the ASP by geo and cohort. So you're starting to look at that. The fourth one was rep contribution, like percentage of rep contribution each quarter. And then the fifth one was percentage of our revenue that's in the green zone every quarter, like in your cohort. And the green zone is different for every company. Green zone for us is 75 to 250K ACV. So that we're looking at. So I said, now we measure these 5 things, we can't go wrong. And I said, this is how you're going to look at if we're doing the right thing. And anytime me and Saji have a conversation, he'll be like, hey, Parm, we should try this. And I just have to go, hey, mate, I'll pull up that slide. So tell me which bubble this hits in the right way.
I like that.
Right. And he's like, and he smirks and he goes, okay. And then we another idea. So anytime like anything, it allows me to kind of have a parameter of we agreed these 5 things. And it's the same thing I presented to the board. I said, we agreed these 5 things. The irony out of all of this, the first 2 mattered the most. The time to ramp and the productivity, because the other 3 actually follow in fine. But the other 3 were actually designed so that the ASP was telling me, how are we actually selling? Are we selling on value? Are we doing the BVAs? Is a correlation? I didn't want any of the reps to die in the vine. That's why I was looking at percentage of the reps that were going to be contributing every quarter, a minimum of 75% of their quota. And then the reason for measuring the green zone was, have I got reps that are waiting there for that last big deal that they're blank, 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 and then Q4, boom, 2 million, I'm done. Because that's also an attrition risk, because they might not have nothing going after. So those other 3 actually were anchored around the sales process and coachability. The first 2, which is we knew that you got to measure that to build any predictable go-to-market machine. But the other 3 were actually sales process and about the people.
Well, I love what you just said there because, like, as a new CRO, you also have to establish the operating rhythm or the communication or the metrics that we're going to follow. Because if you don't, you get something that I call rock management. And you go to a board meeting and they'll tell you, okay, that's great, but we want to take a look at these 5 things. We want you to go pull data on these 5 things. And I'm telling you, if you don't have those established, like you just said, and you don't get everybody to agree, I'm not saying that you can't have a new one that comes up, but I love how you say, okay, what we're talking about at the table right now, what problem are we trying to solve with what we're looking at on these 5? And it's going to be in there somewhere, but it's amazing to me how people that are further and further away from the business, they'll start, I call it rock management. You come away from a board meeting, there's 15 new things that they want you to pull, 15 new data sets, 15 new things that they want you to look at. You got to be very, very careful. And you're a new CRO, you're like, okay, many people are like, okay, I'll go do that. Now all of a sudden we're managing 15 new things, 30 things, and now it's rock management.
I do think you have to look at the product, though, because I'll give you a personal experience. So I went into a company, sat down with the executive team, and they told me, they said, how many use cases do you have? We have 13 use cases. I said, I might as well leave now. They said, what do you mean? I said, point to the development guy. You can't build world-class products to 13 different use cases. The marketing guy can't market to 13 use cases. And I can't build a world-class sales force that can sell world-class to 13 different use cases. So we got to narrow this down to 3 or 4 where we bring out the largest quantifiable value for the customer. That's one situation where I had to check. The other one was I got acquired, and the acquiring company, they made me the CRO, and I had like 30 different products.
Wow.
In that situation, I had to figure out which products we could sell that companies actually wanted to buy, because there were a lot of older products in there. So I was in my first executive meeting, and I told them, I'm not selling these other products. I'm only selling the products that the customers want to buy and that my people can sell. The guy that ran development for these 30 different products got pissed off at me and started yelling at me. Did you hear what he just said? He's only going to sell certain products. And I said, yeah. And I looked at the CFO and the CEO. I said, you have a choice. I can sell all 30 products and we may not make the number. Or I can sell the products that we can sell and people want to buy and we'll make the number. Which one do you guys want? And they said, well, we want to make the number. So you really do. In different, whether it's a startup like the first one, or it's a bigger company like the second one, you're a brand new CRO. Yeah, you got to look at process and people, but to me, you got to look at product too, and ICP and what's going on there. Otherwise, you're blindly just going into the marketplace. Because you got to take your sales reps and say, we're not going this way, we're going this way.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah,
And mostly, would you agree, Johnny, that you probably did that before you got in there and you knew what products were selling and what products were not selling. So you had power. You're not going to take it. Your point is you're not going to take one of these roles if you don't understand that. And you're not going to take a role and figure that out 90 days later.
I didn't have a choice. I was acquired by a bigger company, and then they made me the CRO.
Well, I remember your choice. Like you didn't have to, you didn't have to do it. I know exactly where you were and when I got the phone call.
I couldn't invest my stock so I could get out.
Yeah.
I was just saying, I think we all know the company. I think we've all been there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, so Parm, let's switch gears just a little bit. You're also a go-to-market advisor for Menlo Partners, right? You got to talk to a lot of early stage startups and tech founders. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you position, the 3 R's, revenue, recruiting, and retention with those people? Any insights or stories you want to share?
Yeah, no, it's interesting with the work that we're doing with that I kind of do with Menlo, and a lot of it really a lot of it comes back to the stage of the company, because you've got some that are just coming out of founder-led sales and they're hiring their first VP of sales. Some of them have come out and they've got their first VP of sales and they're at 10 or 15, and some of them like are further on, and they've got kind of different problems everywhere. But I think one of the big traps a lot of them fall into is they try to recruit for what they really kind of like, how would I describe it? They try and recruit for like domain expertise or something that like right close to them. And I'm kind of like,
classic mistake.
Yeah. And the problem there is they try and recruit for the domain experience. And like I sometimes kind of joke, like, well, if you're hiring for the domain experience, you can go and get anybody that you know, but that you could get it from one of the biggest competitors that you've got in the market. Now, the problem is the person at that biggest competitor is walking in because they might be 90% market share or, some high number, and they're walking in because of the business card. And I always use this phrase. I said, have they had success in a non-branded software company? And I asked the founder, I was like, no. So I said, last time I checked, you're pretty non-branded, aren't you? And they go, yeah. So I said, well, why wouldn't we take someone? But they're like, it's really important to know the space. And I said, is it? And then we would spend time. And then I said, well, here's the value prop. Back to your point, John, you'd simplify it right down. So you actually solve these 3 things. Okay. And this persona cares about these 3 things. Right. And then how quick is the payback? Okay. Well, do you think I could go and have the conversation? And they're like, yeah, of course you can. I'm like, well, that's just no different. I said, you got to hire for something a little bit different.
Hire an SE that's a technical domain expert and patch them with the best salesperson in the world. Then they'll sell a lot more. That's why you have SEs in the first place, right? 100%. That's such a classic mistake, right? Classic.
And then the other area where they fall down on, especially first-time founders, because they don't know any better, is they'll hire a sales leader and they'll be like, hey, you stay over there, you focus on the tech, leave all this sales stuff to me. That's on my bag. You don't need to worry about it. And it kind of blows their minds, because when I sit down with a founder and I say, hey, listen, like, I have this mindset of like data-driven go-to-market. And I said, the quicker you understand that, the quicker you're going to be value add. And I say, like, if you want 5 to equal that, it's always going to be 2 plus 3. In the history of time, 2 plus 2 is never going to equal 5. So the point to kind of bring that up is, the irony is a lot of the early stage founders, once they've got product market fit and they're starting to like pour fuel on this, they're actually wanting to stay close to the field to understand what to keep building. And sometimes if they get the wrong sales leader who actually says, get back from the field, it actually has a detrimental effect to the company.
Yeah.
And then they have to try and course correct after. They're like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. So there's no like one size fits all, because there's different stages that they have different problems. Somebody who's just transitioned founder-led sales to the first couple of sales reps, that's different. The person who's going from like 10, 15 to that next jump. And then the area where things start to kind of, how do I say, where they're looking for predictability and repeatability is actually north of about 30 million. So it's trying to be able to understand what is it you're solving for. You can't go in with your coaching for what you're having with somebody transitioning from founder-led to hire the first 3 reps to what you're telling somebody on scaling, and vice versa.
Yeah. Another classic mistake is not only hiring somebody that has a lot of domain experience, but they hire somebody from a really big company. So they hire somebody from Salesforce.com or Oracle or IBM with the big name.
Yeah.
And to your point, or Cisco or something, and then they find out after a while, this person really can't sell. The reason they can't sell is when they picked up the phone, hey, I'm John McMahon from Cisco. Bang, people know who I am. They know what products I sell. There's a budget for it already. There's already a person assigned to handle the budget and handle the salesperson. They never had to call up with a no-name company where the person doesn't know what the product is and there's no budget, and you got to go steal budget from someplace else. That's another classic mistake that you see all the time. And meanwhile, they're burning money when they do that. They're burning money.
Yeah, I think it's since the finish of the zero interest rate phenomenon, I think it's a lot of that. What is it Warren Buffett says? When the tide goes out, you find out who's swimming naked. Well, there was a lot of tides going out over the last couple of years, and you can see that. You can see that.
What other classic issues do you have to coach the startup?
Misalignment on the ICP. Like, there's an aspiration, and I use this example that you might have aspirations that you want to go and sell to General Motors, but what you really actually need to be able to sell to is like Evans bicycles or like, Specialized, because that's where you are at that point. And everything has to kind of like factor in around that, your cost of sale, like your proof of value, everything like that. You can't go and afford to run a hefty enterprise sale that might be $1 million or $500,000 to General Motors, where you're selling to some bicycle manufacturer for $25K.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to the ICP. Who's your ICP? What's the propensity for them to buy? And what's the complexity of your sales process? To your point, if you're going to sell, you're a raw startup, you want to sell to General Motors, Boeing, or JP Morgan Chase, they might fit in your ICP. They have a low propensity to buy, but they have a super high complexity to sell. And do you want to tie your sales reps up in those long sales processes while you're burning money?
Exactly. And I think
Sorry, go ahead, Parm. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's nothing wrong with the vision that one day you want to go and get to a JP Morgan or a General Motors or anybody like that. But then a lot of these startups, they ship software very, very quickly, like quarterly, monthly, whatever. So the point I always use the phrase when I talk to a lot of these startups over at Menlo is I always say that, well, your ICP is constantly going to get wider as you ship more product. So just because I'm setting your ICP here right now it's only for the next 6 months. And depending how quickly you ship, you're obviously going to have a beta release, an alpha release. We start pipeline generating a quarter before that. We can stay close. Like, you never want to be more than a quarter ahead. And this is a lot of feedback I've given founders. You never want your go-to-market engine to be more than a quarter ahead of your product getting shipped. Anything more than that, you got a crit sick issue on your product, or you got rep attrition.
Yeah. Well, because the reps in the sales force stop believing because you're not delivering.
Look, it might take you 2 years to go and say, well, I want to go and sell to General Motors, and today I'm like selling to people making skateboards, right? That's fine. But am I in a situation that I can go to a startup like a Rivian or a Tesla a year from now or 18 months from now? Like, you got to be able to see, here's the path and here's where it goes. And I don't think many founders know that. I think they've fundraised and they've thought about it, because obviously, look, they're going in and they're fundraising and they're still getting a lot of term sheets for the latest AI thing or the latest thing that they're launching. So they naturally think that, no, it's going to be this easy to go and sell. And then reality hits them.
Well, I think also their baby too. So they've invested a lot in that product, right? Their heart, their soul, their money, their time. And then they believe that everyone's going to buy their baby. And there's a reality in the world that not everybody's going to buy your baby. That's not a perfect fit for everyone.
You know, what's interesting is some of the best technical founders, and it's not always the case anymore because, you know, people are coming right out of school and doing some things. But I found some of the best technical founders were actually the problem solvers in big companies that big companies were too slow. You look at how Salesforce, I mean, the landscape is just littered with people that have gone and started companies because big companies weren't able to address it, or they learned what the problems were, like in fintech, or they learned in government or what have you. And what I find is sometimes what you guys are describing is they get distorted because they remember the problem as it was at Bank of America.
Yeah.
And now they have to, like you're talking about, Parm, they have to have a maturity process that's going to allow them to build up to being able to sell to the Bank of Americas. But I find it's interesting. There's a difference between technical founders who come out of school and technical founders who come out of companies that they were solving these problems and they came up with a great idea and they said, why don't I go leave and go? I find those people very, very interesting, but I do find that they struggle with ICP.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because even just how we started at Benchling, like we started in the mid-market and then we started to penetrate into the enterprise and the global top 20 biopharma. We kind of grew into that, but we grew into it two ways because a lot of those mid-market companies got acquired by the big boys.
Yeah.
But it's interesting what you say, Cap and John, because if you look at Uber, so I was kind of analyzing this because Menlo's a big investor in Uber in the early days. But then I was talking to Jerry Chen at Greylock, and if you look at the amount of companies that have come out of former Uber employees, it goes back to, John, when you talk about the number of CROs that came out of Blade Logic, like it's a similar, Jeremy Duggan and I were actually talking about this a couple of weeks ago in London, and we were saying they're the equivalent that if you look at the Uber, you always knew it was up. It never fell down. It always transacted, and it made you kind of think. And then when you look at all these founders that come out, have either built their AI ML platforms, they've built observability platforms, they've built security platforms, and like there's this kind of like big diaspora that's come out of that, and that's a completely different diaspora that's come out versus somebody that maybe had come out of Salesforce, because like just because of the tectonic shift that's keep happening, and I think we'll keep seeing that as some of these big ones. The other one that we started to see is people that are coming out of Robinhood and DoorDash. These big web scale companies have spotted a problem and they're starting again. But whether they have come straight out of college and come up with a greenfield idea and they've got funded and they're away at the races, or whether they've come out of a bigger company, you're right. There's always some degree of optimism and they stub their toe at some point, and you just got to figure out are they going to stub it, and when? And that know that just keep them away. It's like my kids, like my youngest 8-year-old, like he's just like got rid of the training wheels. He's got to fall a little bit, but not like too badly to learn.
Got to fall as long as you don't have to take them to the hospital, right?
Yeah, just got to make sure it's like not one of those ones where like my wife's like it's another incident left with Parm.
So, Parm, hey, are you just maybe the last thing? Are you seeing any new tools that are becoming more pertinent in the sales process, whether it's from the SDR all the way to closing or doing BVAs, or any other tools that are becoming like irrelevant lately?
First off, it feels like AI is spawning a hell of a lot more. I was reading a report from one of the VCs that just in the last quarter, they had 150 go-to-market tool pitches. And which just goes back to the original point I said that there's a plethora of data. But I think what's starting to happen now is there's a plethora of data and there's a bunch of platforms that are saying that we can take workload, like these agentic AI workloads, and it started with SDRs and stuff. Right now, I think there hasn't been anything that's massively jumped out to me that I would honestly say that I can't live without this kind of thing. But I think there's a lot of new entrants. And if you just look at the pace of AI innovation, I think there'll be more new entrants. I always say anything that does come out into the market has really got to be that kind of like does two things, in my opinion, which is number one, gives you a GPS or a sat nav of where the deal is, and then gives you an actionable dashboard. And what I mean an actionable dashboard, it's like Amazon does it really well. If you notice how many times when you shop at Amazon, it says people that bought this, bought stuff like this. And I think there's that level lacking. And there's a lot of people trying to crack it. It'll be interesting to see over the next couple of months and over the years. I still think we're in the early innings because I'm going to use an analogy that when I went to university in '97, I bought a Nokia phone, and when I bought it in the shop, it was the sliding one that they had in the Matrix. And I thought it was really cool and stuff like that, but clearly no. How I was sold, they said, "Hey, the internet's going to come on the phone," and I'm like, "Yeah, no worries." I said, "Okay, I need that." I leave university, I go into school. I leave university, go into the workplace. And then I've got another Nokia phone that's got my emails on. It wasn't until I turned up at BMC, like in 2010, where we had the Blackberries. And everybody was saying, like, the BlackBerry, it's the office tool. And then BlackBerry had their little kind of internet on it. And it wasn't really internet, it was wireless access protocol. Nobody used it. It wasn't until iPhone shipped the first iPhone in 2008 that we truly got internet on the phone. And then if you look at it, the first iPad shipped in 2010. And then all of a sudden, if you look at it, we've become de facto used to how the iPhone operates, or like, if you're an Android user, how the phone operates. I find it alien when I have to log into my bank on my desktop because I'm so used to everything on the phone. Now, why am I kind of bringing that round is, number one, a lot of the technologies I have seen are still orientated to the desktop. They haven't actually figured that jump out, that most of the sales reps are on iPads or they're on like phones.
100%.
Yeah, they haven't figured that out, which is mind-blowing, which is really actually mind-blowing. The second thing is, I was just saying how long that journey took. It took 20 years, if you really think about it, from 97, 98 to really 2008 to we truly believe that internet was on the phone. Now, we know in every technology cycle, it condenses and gets half and half and half and half. And we've seen that. SaaS took us 2 decades, cloud's taken us a decade, data took us 5 years. And if you look at the performance of some of the like the chat GPTs and all that, like it's got better and better. That's why I'm saying a lot of this money that's running that these 150 companies that got pitched to one of these VCs that I know about, I actually think that what's actually going to happen this year is going to be much quicker than what happened in the past. But people are not like thinking that this is a first-class citizen. Like anybody knows if they want to get hold of me, it's this. This is the pane of glass now.
Right. It's a supercomputer compared to just 10 years ago. Right.
Totally.
Yeah. And what it's going to do, I think it's going to give you all that data that we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, where you are personally looking for insights.
Exactly.
It's going to take all that data and give you the insights.
Yeah. It goes back to the point you were making when you were saying, how do you go and get leaders who maybe haven't been around the kind of playbook or just live that kind of data mindset? Someone doesn't just take the data and hit people over the head, because that's assault. That's not coaching people. That's just assault.
Right. Yeah. Good. Parm, thank you, man. And congrats on the new opportunity at Benchling. Sounds interesting.
Yeah. Been here 9 months. So far, so good. And we're just 2 weeks away from wrapping up the quarter. So that's
wow, it's 9 months already you've been there. Wow.
Yeah. Times.
I
could have had another kid. Darji might be saying it's him that's had the kid.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Parm. Thank you,
no
Cap.
worries.
Thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.